Welcome back to part 2 of the tutorial. This time we're going to be working in Blender. So I already got it open here to the welcome screen. So I'm using Blender version 2.65, which as far as I know is the most recent one. When you first open, you're going to see 3 objects in your screen. So if you just right click, it'll highlight. This is the camera. I don't need a camera for this because we're not making any pictures. So I'm just going to hit X and then delete that just to get it out of the way. This one's a light, and we don't need that either, so we'll delete that. This cube we're not going to use for everything except for scaling. I'm going to show you how you can check the real world size of your model in Blender. NetFab will have more precise measuring techniques, but I can basically get the size I want in Blender, and it makes me know I can understand how big my model is going to be without having to muck around with it in NetFab. Okay, so I know in the video it's hard to see the grid. If you see this little, this grid that's around it, there's 2 view modes. There's perspective mode, which I'm in right now, is the 3D viewing mode. If you hit 5 in your numpad, it turns that into orthographic mode, which is looking at everything in a 2-dimensional image. And I find orthographic mode easier to work in, but I know on the video you can't see the grid. So like right now I'm looking at a bunch of little squares as a grid, and you should see it too if you actually go into Blender, but the video doesn't pick that up. So sometimes I'll be talking about squares or grids, and if you can't see it on my video, when you're in Blender you'll see it, what I'm talking about. Okay, so I would hit 5, get into orthographic mode. You're also going to notice 2 colored lines right now. There's a red one going across the screen. That's your x-axis, and then the green one is your y-axis. Now typically when people are 3D modeling, they usually think of y as the up and down axis, but actually in the 3D sites that we're going to be uploading this to, there's a couple that I've tried, and that's Shapeways and Sculpteo. Both of them seem to use the z-axis or the z-axis. I'm Canadian, so I guess z-axis as the up and down. So if you hit 1 on your number pad, you'll notice it rotates, and now you see a blue line. That's the z-axis. Okay, so we're going to line everything up with the z-axis as our up and down, so that when you upload it to your site, that's what people will see. This is how they're going to view it. Okay. Now I want to get this cube out of the way, so I'm going to hit G. That grabs the cube, so you can see now I can move it around. If I right click, it releases it back to its starting point. I just want to slide it over on the x-axis, so I'll hit grab, X, and slide. Okay, and I'll show you why that's important as soon as I import the other model. So now I'm going to import the model that we put together in DAZ. So if I go to File, Import, Object, and I put it on our desktop, so hit Desktop, Girl OBJ, and Import Object. Alright, so there is our girl. I'm just using the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Okay, so how big is this girl? If you look at this cube, okay, the cube that came in the default window, it's 2 squares high. Okay, you see that grid there? These squares that the cube comes out on are 1 millimeter each. So this cube, if I were to, as is, send it up to a 3D printer or try to print it, would come out as a 2 millimeter by 2 millimeter by 2 millimeter cube. Now if you're in the program itself, or if you load into the program, you'll actually see that each cube is set in a 10 by 10 larger cube, or larger square rather. Okay? So I can see that each millimeter square, and then after 10 of those, it gets a darker line. Okay, so that's a 1 centimeter square. So I can actually measure my models just by using the grid. If I zoom out again, I can see these much larger squares. Again, it got darker. That's 10 centimeters. So just by counting these squares, I can see that she is 18 centimeters high, which is much larger than I want. I'm going to try to put her down to about 3 centimeters. For my purposes here. So she's clearly much bigger than I want. Okay, so I'm going to shrink her down so that she is only 3 centimeters. So I need to select her. Now you'll notice if you right click on various parts of her body, it highlights her. We have her in 3 different groups, and that's why I exported her the way I did, is so I can work with these 3 groups separately. So right now I have her hair, her body, and her dress. Okay, you'll see how they highlight differently. I'm just going to highlight all 3 of those so that they scale together. Then hit the S button and move towards the origin point, that little orange dot, and it's going to shrink her right down. Okay, so let's zoom in a little with your mouse wheel. And I said I wanted her 3 centimeters high. I'm actually going to make her 2.8 centimeters because I'm going to add a 2 millimeter base to her. So I'm going to hit S again and just get her so she's right at 2.8 centimeters. Okay. So I got her scaled correctly. I no longer need this cube. So this, you can see, if you don't have any sort of reference point, it's hard to tell which part of the grid is how big. So that's why I like to leave that in there when I'm scaling. But now I'm done with it, so I'm going to delete it. So I just right-click that little square, hit the X button, and it'll come up if I'm okay to delete. So I just hit that. Yep, delete it. All right, so first thing we want to do is fix the dress. So right now, if you hit the R key or just hold... just hold down your mouse wheel and rotate. I thought the R key would do that as well. Okay, and you hit the number pad buttons if you needed to zoom around and look at her from different angles. 5 turns on and off, orthographic and perspective view. So hold down your mouse wheel and move the mouse and it'll rotate. Okay, you can see that the dress is hollow. You can see up her dress. You don't want to be able to do that. Okay, you need to block that in so that the printer will print it out as a solid piece. Right now it's going to say, hey, that's too thin. That fabric's too thin. So what I want to do is right click on the dress and then put it in edit mode. So just click down here, and you're going to notice it turns into a bunch of orange dots. It's because it was highlighted. If you hit the A button, it will select and deselect those dots. These dots are called vertices, and a mesh is made up of vertices that are connected by lines. Right now we're on vertices selection mode, so if I'm going to right click anywhere, it's going to select the closest vertex. Okay. You also have line selection, which we're going to be the one we're going to be using here. And then face select. So basically a line is the point between any two vertices, and the face is the space between lines. Okay? And each one is marked with a big black square in the middle of the face. But right now we're going to work in edge mode. I'm just going to show you how to fill in that dress real quick. So again, we can zoom in with the mouse wheel, rotate by holding down the mouse wheel. And if you hold down the shift button and then click the mouse wheel and pull your mouse, it will slide. So that's shift, click mouse wheel, and slide. And there's other short hotkeys. You have to look those up. I'm so used to doing it this way. Okay, so what I want to do is fill in this empty space. So I'm going to click on the bottom edge of that dress. But what I want to do is I actually want to select this whole ring. There's actually a shortcut for that. Just hold down Alt and right click, and you'll notice that it highlighted this whole entire ring. And there's a really quick way to fill that in. Just hit F. Okay, so F is a face creator, so it just fills faces in between your highlighted edges. So that was a nice, quick, easy fix. Now let's say we want to make sure that this dress is manifold. Well, this has a really nice function on it as well. If I hit select, non-manifold, it will show me if there's any non-manifold parts of her dress. You can see that it actually highlighted where her sleeves are. If you wanted to, you could actually just use the same trick we did down here at the base of the dress, but I'm actually going to thicken the dress a little bit, and so that'll actually fix it itself. So I'll actually show you that right away just so you know what I'm talking about. So go back to edit mode, object mode. So go down here, make sure you click on object mode. So it goes back so you see a solid gray dress. And then on the top right, you're going to see a little picture of a crescent wrench. So just click on that. And these are what we call modifiers. So I'm going to add a modifier, and I'm going to do what we call solidify modifier. And I have to use this a lot when I'm 3D printing just to make models thick enough to print. There's a certain width that everything has to be in order to print. So what I'm going to do is you have this little scale slider where it says thickness. I'm just going to left click on that and then move left, and it'll make the dress a little thicker. So you see that's with the base where the sleeves are. Now you see a little bit more of an exaggerated detail around where her dress is going to be. Now remember, I'm making a 3 centimeter high model, so I kind of want to accent things a little bit more than you might think is necessary, because you're going to lose a little detail on the printing. Okay. The only thing is when you're done solidifying it, you want to make sure that you apply it. So make sure you hit that apply button. Okay, now let's take a look at that in edit mode. Okay, you can still see that selected there, those orange, because that's, so just unselect because that was saved from last time. Now let's hit non-manifold again. You'll notice it's not highlighting this time. That's because when I thickened it, it actually took care of the manifold problem. But if you didn't want to thicken the dress, you could have just gone to the sleeve and done the same thing I did at the base of the dress in this case. It's a very simple dress. Okay. So next, let's go back to object mode. Now let's work on her. I'm just going to work on her a little bit. Her fingers, I kind of made the dress a little too thick. Her fingers have kind of sunk in. I could have fixed that. When you're in Blender or in Daz Studio, I could have bent her fingers out a little bit so it looks more like this. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it so her hand actually is touching her dress, which they are now, but her fingers went inside. But when you're in Daz, you can just be a little more careful on how you pose it so that when you thicken everything, that doesn't happen. But I'm not going to worry about fixing it at this point. I'm just going to add a slight modifier to her as well, just to make sure things are thick enough. Things like fingers you have to watch for, because if they're too thin, then they're gonna break off. They're not gonna print properly. But if I get everything so it's actually thick enough that it's just connected with her dress, then it should be fine. You do lose a little detail, but again, it's gonna be a 3 centimeter high model, so if you lose a little bit, you should be all right. See, she still looks pretty good there. Okay, and I applied that. So the last one I want to do is her hair. Now her hair is too thin. It definitely needs to be solidified. So alright, so I'm just going to thicken her hair a little bit. Alright, well I'm going to do an all-out scale at the end here. So I'm just going to apply that for now. Select everything. So just hit A. A selects and deselects everything. And then I hit Control J and combine these into one model. So now it's all one thing. And I always like to put the origin to center of mass. This is where I can tell where the model is going to balance, especially if you're going to be making a model that has weird balance on it. And you want to make sure that the center of balance is over the base, because we're going to put a base on this. Then you always know where the weight's distributed at. Okay, so orange dot shows me the center of mass on the model there. Okay. I'm just going to add another modifier, solidify her a little bit more. Again, like, you can fine tune how much detail you get. I just want to make sure that her hair is going to I want it kind of close enough and thick enough that it's going to actually print. I'm not really sure how that's going to work out at the moment. But, so you can get better detail than this, but again, it's something you have to play around with a little bit. Alright, so let's just add a base to her. So I'll make sure I get her in the right mode. So add, mesh, cylinder. If you want a nice round base, just go down to vertices here before you click on the cylinder, and you can type in how many vertices are round. So I'm going to do, it starts at 32, or mine was at 32. Put 128, so it looks more like a circle. You can see that's too small for a base. I'm going to hit S and scale it up. And obviously that's too tall, so now I'm going to scale, but constrain the scale to the Z or Z axis. At about 2 millimeters or so. Grab it and just put that underneath her. Hit around your number pad to rotate, just make sure it's underneath her. Okay. And make sure her feet are actually resting on it. You want to make sure it's actually touching. Which it should be, but I'm just going to grab along the Z just to be sure. Okay. And then shift right click to select both of them, and then Control J. Now these are one model. Okay, so now we're just going to export this map model. Oh, actually, let's look for manifolds first. So now we select. Oh, sorry, go to edit mode. Deselect everything. Select non-manifold. Okay, so you can see there's no orange in there. That means this model's manifold. There shouldn't be any problems, at least in terms of that, when we're going into print it. Some parts might still turn out to be too thin, like I'm not sure about the thickness of her hair. But let's just go ahead and export her. So you go to File, Export, and I'll just do as an OBJ file again. And this time I'll just put her on desktop, and I'll just call it girl2 so we can distinguish it from the file that we made in Daz. Okay, so the next part, so I just hit export OBJ over here on the right. It just takes a couple seconds. So in the next part, I will show you how to just fix that up a little bit in NetFab, and then upload that to a website. We're just going to upload it to Shapeways. Okay.